Hello, I'm Alisa Parenti. I want to welcome you to the launch of the book, The Optimizer, written by John Saunders. And thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I want to also thank you for your engagement over the last year. I know John is particularly appreciative of all that you have done, and he's going to be thanking you a little bit more in a little bit. But your engagement over this year has made this day possible. Not just tonight, but actually bringing the book into the world. And so I know we're all grateful for that. The final product, if you've had an opportunity to dig in, if it's come in the mail yet, the final product contains so many fascinating stories. I think it's going to be a tremendous resource and tool for executives and leaders across multiple industries and organizations over the coming years. On the back, they have what are called in the industry praise lines, and one of them really resonated with me. It's written, Saunders' holistic perspective provides us with knowledge and insight and calls on leaders to reflect upon the culture they create. The optimizer will broaden your mind and touch your heart. Really well said. That from Prashant Malavia, Senior Associate Dean of MBA Programs at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. It was actually at Georgetown, at McDonough, that I first met John a couple of years ago. And from that time until today, I can tell you, as you no doubt know, he is tireless, he's energetic, he's committed, and he's very good at connecting ideas and people and networking. And this book is a lot like John in that way. I think it is very useful, very readable, very funny, very practical. And I think it provides a real boots on the ground type approach for people in all walks, in all careers. So I'm sure you're excited about it and hope you feel the same way. One of the stories in the book, and it's my favorite, but there are so many favorites, is about an employee back in the day at Sears Roebuck who was selling carpets and drapes. And he was in a back office and found this folder that had a list of previous Sears customers and said, my gosh, this is outstanding. This is great. This is a good list of leads that we can take to go call on these folks and make them repeat customers. And so John's got the dialogue where Paul goes in and says, we found leads to call on. And the manager says, this is Sears. We don't call people. They come to us. And I think that's really the antithesis of what we need right now. If we learn nothing else in 2020, we saw that the old ways, they're not working anymore. We've got to come up with new ways. We've got to be innovators. We've got to be serial innovators and optimizers to be successful in these days and certainly post-pandemic. So tonight you're going to meet a very special guest who is also profiled in the book. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of him and of course of John. Quick few biographical notes about John. You know, he went undergrad to the University of Wisconsin. He got his MBA at Georgetown, Hoya Saxa, and at McDonough. And in 2019, after 2 decades on Wall Street, he founded an organization called Forward Advisory Solutions. So that's kind of the preview. Now let's go to the main event. We want to bring John in here and get this party started. I know I'm excited. And so welcome to you, John, and congratulations. This is magnificent. I am so thrilled and excited and proud and honored to be a part of this launch. Congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. It's really great to see you here. I really appreciate you helping us out tonight. Great to see everybody on the screen here as well.
John, tell us, this has been an unbelievable journey, year long. Tell us what compelled you to write The Optimizer, to write this book to begin with.
You know, I guess I've been in the workforce 25 years, as you said, about 23 of those spent on Wall Street now, doing coaching for the last couple of years and some consulting work. And what I found is so many people never really unleash their gift to the world. And the reason I found that to be was, you know, unleashing your gift, often it requires stepping out there, taking a risk, doing something new, innovative. And people that creates an emotional charge for people. It can create fear and uncertainty, loss, shame. And, you know, these are very powerful forces. And if those forces aren't allowed or enabled to be unleashed, because they're going to happen when change occurs, people are just going to kind of curl up in a ball and not, fulfill their true gifts, if you will. And so I just saw this so many times over and over again. And I believe it's really incumbent upon the leaders of the world to go to their team and create this environment, create this mindset, this culture where people feel safe to not take massive risks every day, but to allocate space to risk throughout their business, throughout their planning, and time throughout the month, quarter, year. So no matter what's happening in the world, right, there's going to be change sooner or later, right? It's always like 2020, right? Could there have been more change? And in this environment, if you have this mindset of sort of constantly thinking about incremental change, I think you could be far more adaptable to any environment. And really what my goal with the book is to help leaders create that roadmap, to give them the ability to help that mindset foster inside of their organization. And really, at the end of the day, help their employees be more passionate about their jobs. And I think ultimately deliver better results.
So let's get right to the crux of it, John. What do you do? How does a leader or a manager create that kind of safe space for their employees and people following them? You mentioned just kind of the litany of horrible emotional things that can occur. And so it is an emotional challenge. How do you kind of overcome that? What do you do to create those safe spaces?
Yeah. In part of my research for the book, I came across this Harvard professor, Teresa Amabile, and she studied thousands of employees. And one of the things she found in her research was people want to see progress at work, which sounds so simplistic, but progress often involves change. So there's a really interesting irony here, which is your employees want to see progress, which means they're ready and willing to deal with change. But at the same time, they fear it. And I believe the reason they fear it is because of this mindset issue I keep talking about. And I think one of the biggest challenges we face is, we live in this world of sort of instant satisfaction, right? Oh, we tried this and it didn't work, so let's get rid of it. And I would argue everything that my book talks about, none of these things change results over time. They're about systems and processes to make this work. And let's face it, this is about a culture where people do their day-to-day jobs, but as I said, allocate time to driving change, coming up with new and better ways. Your best people are doing this, but not everybody is. So what it is as a leader is finding ways to creatively challenge your team in a non-threatening way. And the only way you can do that is to get to know them, which is just incredibly important to help drive that attitude, that mindset. So find a way to challenge them where they don't feel threatened, they don't feel backed into a corner, where they think about creating change. And this thing can become self-fulfilling. Oh, hey, look at my peer over there is doing something interesting and it's driving good results for us. What are they doing? Create and encourage curiosity, help your team get to know each other. And there's a number of things you can do to get that done. But it's creating this, to be cliche, this circle of trust where people believe they can take risk and work with each other and really build, this work. Teamwork is so overused, but I think it's so important. And there's real value in building that trust between a team. And it starts with conversations and getting to know your people.
And can you give us an example of this mindset shift in the real world, this idea of building trust? I mean, maybe any additional thoughts on that?
Sure. When I first became a new manager at the firm I worked at for many years, I was a peer to a lot of these people for 10, 15, 20 years. Suddenly I'm their boss, right? And so the first thing I set out to do was, how do I get to know these folks on a different level? What's their family like? Do they have children? Where do they go on vacation? What do they like to do for fun? And having that insight is really the starting point. So one of my team members, this guy, Brian, who unfortunately sent me a note, wasn't able to join us tonight. But I went to him, and here's a guy, as I got to know him, I realized here's someone who's been asked many times to give great ideas, and he's offered them in his career, but oftentimes they didn't really go anywhere. And he was frustrated with that. So I went to him 6 or 12 months into what we were doing and trying to build my new team and my brand with the team. And I said, Brian, we do all these conference calls and I don't feel like they're getting us very far. How would you improve this circumstance if you were me? And he said, get rid of a bunch of them. was his answer to that question, which was kind of funny. Or I think he said, we have too many darn calls, might have been his real answer. Something closer to that. So I look at the whole year. I was mapped out the year at a time. And I realized if I just got rid of the calls the day after, instead of taking Memorial Day and pushing it to Tuesday or 4th of July and pushing it a day or something like that, I just got rid of those calls around Labor Day and these holidays. And just doing that knocked out like 15 or 20% of the calls. So the point here is really the way you empower people is, let your actions speak louder than words and talk about building trust. So I get rid of these calls. I send a note to the team. Hey, everybody, Brian thinks we have maybe too many calls. So let's try this pilot this year. And that's a very important word. And a lot of my ideas is using the word pilot, which is, it's not permanent, right? Hey, we're trying something new. It might stick, it might not, but let's do this together. And you have to frame it like that. So I put it out there. Hey, everyone, Brian thinks we have too many calls. We're going to try this new thing. And boom, all these invites popped off their calendar. And I freed up a bunch of their Mondays or Tuesdays because, if I push the call to a Tuesday. So fast forward to the end of the year and the last call of the year. And I say, Brian, I asked everyone, I said, hey, everyone, the pilot is over. What do you think? Should we bring the calls back? And Alisa, this was the moment when I really learned the definition of the silence is deafening, because not one person said a word, which told me all I needed to know. So just that simple act of asking for feedback and taking action with it and giving him credit was such a powerful moment. And that, I can tell you as a leader, having asked my team for feedback significant or a number of times at this point, people were skeptical. Oh, why? Is just asking me this stuff to make me feel good. Well, now they saw me take action. And that, honestly, that simple action was such a floodgate opener, and it made so many things easier going forward.
Yeah, I can believe that. And I bet you were kind of the hero for a moment to eliminate any kind of conference calls. This feedback loop, maybe talk about that. I mean, I think obviously the importance of you acting on the feedback that you're getting in a pilot capacity, if you will, that allows people to say, oh, okay, he really, not only is he listening, he's doing what I'm suggesting. I have a buy-in to what's happening here. So maybe talk about that piece of the feedback loop. How do you discover the power of asking for and implementing feedback?
No, I appreciate that. One of my favorite stories is with Ian Roche, but I'm going to save that for later if we have time, because I want to highlight one of the really amazing people, several amazing people that were in the book. One of them is Patty Brennan. She is a top financial advisor in the Philadelphia area. And I mean, if there's an award for financial advisors, it's probably on her wall. I mean, it's unbelievable how well she's run her business over many, many years. She started out as an ICU nurse, which I think is fascinating to me. And I think kind of a decent job to lead into a financial advisor, right? You're always sort of dealing with this chaotic market and have to help people stay calm and sort of get through it. So here she is. She leaves the ICU sector of the hospital, joins a financial advisory firm, opted to leave there and start her own business about 4 years into it. So picture this, given what's going on today. She starts a business in her basement, right? Kids running around upstairs. She's trying to get this thing off the ground. She finally does. Now, fast forward to today, she's got 25 employees on her team, which for those of you who don't know, that is a massive financial advisory team and just incredible. So here's her thing that she does, which I think comes from empathy from nursing, making herself vulnerable to put herself out there and find a way to help others. Every year when she does business planning, all 25 people have an equal voice in that discussion. And everyone shares. And then how do you actually make that work? Because you can say everyone gets the same sort of voice in this thing. Well, just like the example with Brian, anyone who brings an idea forward, if it's useful, they run with it and they implement new processes and systems to make it happen. But what she takes it a step further. She pays everybody. If they hit their goals, everybody gets the same bonus.
Wow.
3,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever the number is, all 25 people get the same number if they hit the goal together. So they plan together and they win together. One other bonus prize that she does, which is really impressive, is throughout the year, she'll have merit things. So as good ideas come up and they impact the business, she has a thing she calls kudos trophies. And it's just a little trophy, a little 6-inch thing. If someone calls in and says, hey, your person on your team did this amazing thing for me. And, now I'm going to send you a referral, or it was meaningful to their business. She will literally bring everyone into the conference room, tell that story, tie it to the business, give them the trophy and a nice amount of money so they can take their spouse or what have you out for dinner. I mean, so she's vulnerable. She puts herself out there, asks for feedback, says, hey, I don't have it all figured out. Help me with this journey. And she ties everyone together through the planning process and the bonus, which is really extraordinary. So I just love that story and how she embraces feedback and really gives people such ownership of it.
Her story is a great one, and I really enjoyed that. Another one of my favorites in the book, particularly struck by the fact of being a nurse and then moving into the financial the world of managing markets and funds and being a market manager. Let's go to the title of the book, because now I was realizing that I wasn't saying the subtitle. So The Optimizer, Building and Leading a Team of Serial Innovators. How do we, finding a title is kind of hard, isn't it? I mean, tell us a little bit about why you chose that title.
Yeah, originally it was called The Optimizer Lifting the Curve. And thanks to the audience sitting on this camera here today and who acted as beta readers and delivered feedback to me, I discovered I was the only one who seemed to know what that meant. So I opted to make a change. So thank you all for that feedback. I really appreciate that, because it was in my mind for so long that it made sense to me, but it clearly didn't make sense to others. So I want to be very literal about it, because, and here's a little teaser for Philip, who's going to be coming up soon. When I interviewed him for the book, I asked him, what does innovation mean to you? And he said, I'll never forget it. Innovation is optimization. And I actually debated him about that answer, which is kind of embarrassing and funny in retrospect, because I didn't get it. And after we talked about it, I realized, oh my gosh, someone has finally given me a word about exactly how I've thought about things for 20 something years. It's all about this serial, constant incremental change. And the important part that comes out in the book is, and that I learned from talking to Philip and literally and researching and interviewing dozens of others, is that people can, back to this emotional charge, people can deal with small steps, right? You say, hey, let's just try to make a marginal change here. And it's not this big leap out into outer space that creates that emotional charge that I talked about earlier. So if you get people thinking in this sort of small, how do I fix things from day to day, week to week, part of my business, that mindset is, one, easier to overcome the emotional steps, but two, can be very powerful, because 1, 3, 6 months goes by, you make a bunch of small changes and suddenly you've got a big change, but it never felt like it because you had this constant incremental nature about it. And so really, for me, it's about, one, creating that mindset of constant change, which helps the business improve and grow. But more importantly, it really helps deal with that emotional aspect of it. One of my favorite examples that came out of the research, there's three, I'll highlight one of them, but I mean, Thomas Edison, John Deere, and Elon Musk all have one big thing in common. None of them invented the thing that they're most famous for. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, 77 years. He didn't invent it. He made it accessible, right, and viable for all of us to buy for $1. John Deere bought a tractor company and turned it into what it is today, the largest in the world. And Elon Musk joined, a lot of people don't know this, he joined Tesla a year after it started. So, and what did they do? They all came in and made these constant incremental changes until it was something awesome. And here we are with three of the best known people in the world, and none of them came up with their original idea. I believe anyone can take this approach if you can take if you can develop a systematic process to get it done.
And small steps every day.
And that's exactly where the title came from, is this optimizer mindset.
That's awesome. So if I would like to ask you to circle back, do we have time to go to, I wanted to ask you for that example of the feedback loop that you teased. You mentioned that was going to be coming up. Do we have time? I want to also encourage people to write in your questions that you have for John. And yes, thank you. There, put your questions into the Facebook and YouTube chat, and we will make sure to bring them out. Maybe talk about, if we have a chance, I would love it, John, if you could hit the story, because I think I know what you're going to talk about, the feedback loop that you referenced. You talked a little bit about that happening earlier in your career, a little bit about complacency.
Yeah, I'll tell the short version of the story, so we can get Philip in here in a minute. So the short version of the story is, I'm sitting at this conference, award ceremony, and it was time for the award I could have won. And I'd won a few, but it had been a few years. And I'm sitting there, they announced the name. It happened to be Ian Roche, I think it was Greg Everett, actually, for the award I could have won. And I realized as soon as they said his name, I wasn't even in the running. And I realized then and there that I was deluding myself. I'd become, I'd grown for years and kind of gotten complacent the last few. And as soon as the award ceremony ends, Ian Roche won the big award that year for the whole company. I run up to him and I said, Ian, did you do something differently this year to have this tremendous year that you had? And he said, yeah, I surveyed my best clients on what it's like working with me and how I could improve our partnership. And I thought, holy cow, what an unbelievable idea. Took his survey, tweaked it marginally, worked with him on framing that conversation, which is basically this. I'll use you as an example, Alisa. Alisa, I love how you run your business. Now you've operated in an effort to be a better partner to you and your business. How would you advise me to go about doing what I do? What should I start, stop, and continue doing? And not one person declined that conversation. And it took 10 or 15 of my best relationships even further. And it gave me this extraordinary start, stop, continue exercise to refine my own business plan. So fast forward the end of that year, I think it was 2011, I was on that stage and won the exact same award Ian won the year before. And that was my parlay into a senior role in leadership at the firm. And really, my career just continued to take off from there. It was really exciting. And then I took that same asking for feedback idea into leadership. And we talked a little bit about that, but that's that story.
That's a good one. Really, really good one. I think everybody can relate to that. So let's see if we have any questions for the folks who are tuned in. If we have them, all of this sounds good, but where do I begin? What would you advise people to do? Yes. Where do we start?
Yeah, I'll tell you,
How do you do it?
One of the interesting exercises I'd encourage everybody to do, and I write about this in the book, if you're a manager and you feel like you're a bit stifled and it's not kind of going the way you want it to, go on Google and type in "my manager is," and just leave that on your screen and see what auto-populates. This is an idea I borrowed from Thomas Chmura-Premuzak. He wrote a book on leadership earlier this year, 2020 now. And if you haven't gone through that exercise yet and you're a leader and you're wondering maybe if things are stalled, do that exercise and see what pops up. Spoiler alert, you're going to get 10 extremely negative words that pop up on the screen. My boss is jealous of me. He doesn't like me. She's not nice to me. All of these terribly negative things. So what I'd encourage everyone to do in sort of the starting point idea is go through that exercise of a bit of reflection first before you start to try to jump right into this idea I'm talking about of building relationships and building trust. Start to do a little reflection on, who am I? What is my brand in the office here? And once you have a better sense of what that is, start to develop some of those questions and have an easy conversation or two with maybe your favorite employee and ask them, hey, what's it like working with me? How can I improve this circumstance? But I think having that little pre-work is super important to make that happen and really prepare yourself for what may be coming. And if things are stalled, there might be some bad things happening behind the scene and you just aren't aware of it yet. So it's a really good exercise in self-awareness.
I like the Jesuit piece of that, of reflection. Let's see if we have another question. Can we get a sense of your author journey and how one goes about writing a book? My favorite. I could have put this into the chat, but I didn't. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
Thanks. I'll talk a little bit more about it later at the end, but really maybe getting specifically to once I got to the program, which was working with a coach, finding out what your writing style is. One of the things the coach I worked with, Eric Custer is his name. One of the things he really stresses is find your style that works for you. You have a schedule, you have a life, you have a family, whatever you have going on, you need to find a way to sort of fit this into your life. And it might be writing in 15-minute increments. If that's your style and you want to write sort of a page at a time, do that. If you like to sit around on Saturdays and do 8 or 9 hours at a time, do that. My personal thing was I kind of like to do sort of mid-sized chunks 5 or 6 days a week. So, my kids go to bed around 9. I would go into my office at 9 o'clock. I still do it now that I'm on another leg of the journey. And I would work from 9 till 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and just pecking away at it, working at it. And then throughout that, one of the things the coaching program does is it offers you an editor. So it's great. You're not just sort of working away at this thing late at night by yourself. You have this very professional check-in point every week to kind of say, what's going on here? Am I sort of on target here? And how's this thing going?
How's it going? And we should mention that that's the Creator Institute for folks who I think hopefully our crowd that's been following you for your journey knows that this is where it goes. But Eric Custer, the founder through Georgetown of the Creator Institute, and then working in tandem with New Degree Press. Any additional questions, or is it, what was your writing process? We heard a little bit about that. It was after I was in bed. Once the kids go, I can tell you like the next iteration of this, John, you find yourself going to bed earlier and earlier. You're like, what the heck? Yeah. So we're writing from 9 until 1 a.m. Not a possibility over here.
I have to tell you, many nights it went till 1 or 2 because I would just, in sports, you hear about people getting in the zone. And honestly, that would happen for me with writing. I'd get in my office, start writing at 9:30, and all of a sudden I'd blink, it'd be 11. I'd kind of blink again, it'd be 1:00 in the morning, and I'd be so close to getting something done and think, oh man, I got to get this done tonight, and blink again, it's 2 a.m, and I was like, that was usually my cutoff. All right, I got to go to bed because it's 2. But that was my thing. Try to do a couple hours, basically 5 or 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And I found that to be a good method for me. And sometimes it's research, sometimes it's interviewing. That I had to do during the day, of course. No one wanted to interview with me at 11 o'clock at night. But it was really about consistency for me and kind of staying with it. I never wanted to have that big 8 or 10 hour day. But everyone had their own thing, and that's what worked for me.
That makes sense. I think it's time for me to head on out. Am I right? And bring in somebody that's going to be a lot more interesting, one of the folks in your book.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's get Philip on board here, and we'll bring you back here in just a little bit. Philip.
Howdy.
Great to see you, sir.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here and being on the program. Really great to see you. I want to do a very quick intro for you. We'll jump into the questions. Just a little bit for everyone about Philip Holt, who's on the call here from Seattle, Washington. I like to call Philip's story from busboy to the boardroom. I think that kind of captures the story in a nutshell, if I could sum it up in a sentence. But Philip grew up in a log cabin outside of the city of Seattle many years ago, or a few years ago, I'll say. And, in a house that his parents built. So he actually watched his parents build a log cabin, which is unbelievable, and then lived in it and then watched them start a business out of that log cabin, which to me is just extraordinary. And then as he's joined the workforce, he started out working in kitchens and in restaurants, and that's where he really began his career. Spent a number of years working at a bunch of different video game studios, which was amazing. Took a bit of a hiatus from the industry and from game studio, big game companies, and started his own company. Raised several $1 million to start a company in Orlando. Gosh, is that 8 or 9 years ago now? Is that right? It's been a little while.
2011.
Yeah, incredible. But a common thread is certainly getting to know Philip over the years and through this interview process is that he has this unique ability to identify and solve problems in a team setting. And I think what you'll find very quickly here is no surprise why Philip is the lead story in chapter 5 of the book. Problem Solvers is the title of that chapter. So again, Philip, awesome to see you. How about we jump into the questions?
Yeah, looking forward to it.
And for those on the line, if you have them, please start to put them in the chat and we'll put them up when we get to Q&A here in a few minutes. So as I mentioned, you started your career in the restaurant industry. Why did you start there? And what do you think are some of the lessons you learned from that point in your journey?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a food family, and you mentioned I was raised in a log cabin. I was an only child, and we just lived out in the sticks. And I think the only time I ever actually saw other people was usually around food. And so just sort of grew up with a passion for how food brings people together. And age 16, I needed a job, and I was unqualified for most anything other than manual labor, and so I got a job in a restaurant. I think the thing about restaurant cooking that's fascinating is, dinner service is probably one of the most chaotic and frantic and high pressure situations you can find yourself in. You have to put up amazing food. It has to be exactly the same every time. It's high volume, and you got like a 3-hour window to get everything done. So it's just a real pressure cooker. In almost every service, something goes wrong. So I think there's a few things that I learned, just from this vantage point, kind of looking back on that time in my life, that have served me well. And the first is that, like any cook will tell you, prep is essential. And so you never can really predict what's going to happen during service, but you can have all of the materials arrayed right at your fingertips so that you can respond to everything. There's a French word called débrouiller, which means sort of to untangle oneself. And it's a common expression that's used in kitchens. And so sometimes you find yourself in the weeds, you've got a lot of tickets and just a lot of chaos happening, or maybe one of the burners goes out on your range, or the deep fryer doesn't work, or the dishwasher's calling in sick. Something always is coming up that you just have to react to. And so sort of learning how to keep your head and to keep calm and to be ingenious or on the spot and figure out how you have to solve the problem, because you got a customer that's paying top dollar for the steak that you're going to put on a plate. You got to get it to them. And then I think that there's a a concept of, I worked for a chef when I was in college, who was kind of a overpowering human, and he was large and physically dominating. And he used to have this expression, the old expression, if you can't stand the heat of the kitchen, get out, has nothing to do with temperature. It has to do with that sort of pressure. And if it's not for you, this is not, you shouldn't be in a kitchen. And then the last idea that I think probably weaves its way through the rest of my career was this idea of optimization. And, like you're doing the same dishes over and over, and you're looking for, even if you can save a half a second here or a motion here, it improves the speed and the flow at which you go when you're trying to cook 20 dishes simultaneously. Just finding little incremental changes that just improve your night. So it was a super valuable experience. I have a lot of respect for the trade. It's a tough job.
It's no doubt about it. And restaurants are one of those things where you sort of don't notice how good the service is until it's not, right? Or the food, and all these things going on behind the scenes. So you learned about, this sort of trial by fire thing where you're, constantly dealing with things changing throughout the night and having to adapt on the fly, and then getting more, optimizing as you go. That's really interesting. When you think about when you went from, sort of those early jobs in the restaurants, and then your first job in corporate America was working for one of the biggest companies in the world in the game industry, EA Sports or Electronic Arts, up in Vancouver, I think it was. You had a manager that you shared, Warren. What do you think? What was that like, and why do you think he took a chance on you? How do you think that worked out?
Yeah, well, I worked for a small company that was acquired by EA, and Warren became my boss and had really no say over. He just inherited me as a part of this transaction, and as a result of that, he invited me up to his office. I was in Seattle, he was in Vancouver, so he invited me up to Vancouver, to get to know me, sort of a meet and greet. And he gave me a tour of the facility, and we sat down, we started chatting, and I was 26. I was super keen to be there. It was just like, oh, this is so great, to see a real pro game studio. And I realized maybe 5 minutes into our little meet and greet that this wasn't a meet and greet. Like, I was being interviewed for the job. And that was a pretty powerful lesson to learn at that age, that really any interaction that you have with your boss is an extended interview. And so I've since then sort of treated my bosses over the years very carefully, very intentionally, I should say. So he gave me, at the conclusion of that meeting, I think he gave me an assignment, and he took a chance on me, certainly, but I think it was kind of a test. And I think he was just like, all right, well, let's see what this kid can do. And so gave me the source code to a baseball game, Triple Play, that was on the Sega Genesis. This is going back a ways. This is the early 90s, mid 90s. And they had moved on to the next generation of hardware, the Sony PlayStation. And so he just said, why don't you just update the game, and we'll release a new version of Triple Play on the Sega Genesis. This is before this was really a concept in the industry of supporting a long tail of a hardware cycle. So I took the source code home, and I pulled together, I think, 3 other team members. It's really kind of a ragtag group of us. There was a designer. It was a super big baseball fan. I had an audio engineer and a programmer, and then myself. And we had, so what would be a fractional team size, maybe a fifth of a normal team. And we had 3 months before the start of baseball season, which is like a really small period of time to be doing an update on a game. Maybe, again, a quarter of the time that a typical team back then would take. And so we were all young in our careers and eager to establish ourselves inside of Electronic Arts, and super grateful to have an opportunity to work on something like Triple Play. So, we rolled up our sleeves and really went after it. We updated all the stats and rosters. We fixed a whole load of bugs in the game. We added a new mode, a new way of playing the game. And an email circulated through the company that announced that we had, sort of passed the quality assurance process, and it was ready for final certification and manufacturing. And my boss Warren was on the email distro, and so he got this email, and he phoned me, and he's like, I kind of forgot that I gave you that assignment, and you didn't need any help or support. That's amazing that you got this done. Well, that game went on to, it was out of plan, so it wasn't on the books. This was just, I think, a made up assignment he gave me. And it did like 400,000 units that year, all upside to our plan, and a super pleasant surprise. So it ended up becoming, an opportunity that we seized and we made the most of, and really launched my career inside of EA.
That's awesome. So he gave you a shot, right? You came in, you didn't even know you were interviewing for your job at first, and now this guy's giving you, this pretty interesting little project to explore and I guess kind of see what you might do with it, take a chance, if you will. When you think about working for this gentleman, particularly versus maybe some of the salty chefs you referenced earlier, what do you think some of the leadership lessons were that were most impactful from working with him?
Oh, he was super formative in my career, and I'm grateful for the time I spent with Warren. And it's been a number of years since I've been in touch with him, but I think he's since retired. He taught me. I mean, I thought he was a teacher, and he showed up as a coach for me rather than a manager. He gave me a lot of. He gave me a clear goal. It was ambitious and some basic constraints, and let me go figure out how to solve that problem. He was supportive. I don't think he ignored me. But he clearly didn't micromanage. And so that was he modeled really good behavior of, setting targets and empowering people. And when I did have time to talk with him, every one of those meetings sort of felt like a lesson, like a coaching session. And I remember vividly a lot of those stories he would tell. The first thing he really emphasized was surrounding yourself with people that were far more talented than you. And he says your career is going to be linked with the quality of the teams that you lead. And if you're working with, subpar teams, that's going to be your brand as the leader of that team. So, because of that, and since then, I have always taken a very active role in recruiting. And so even when I'm supported by a robust recruiting team, I do my own sourcing, I do my own recruiting, I close all of my own hires with their support. But it's such an important aspect of at least our industry. It's just a talent-based industry. So that was one. I think that the other thing I loved about working with Warren is it really kind of taught me that, especially in contrast to the chef that I worked for earlier in my career, that I wanted to become the leader that I always wanted. And I think Warren was probably the closest person to that in my career that sort of felt like, well, I aspire to be like that. He gave me the right level of support. I want to be in a position where I can give my team that level of support.
I love that. Be the manager that you always needed. That's really brilliant. And another theme that I heard in there that really struck me was this idea of being a coach, not your manager, not your boss, but being your coach. How do I help you as my team member get better all the time, right? Not direct you and tell you how to do your job from day to day, but really, I like to use the word trusted advisor, and I think there's sort of some overlap between them. So you build this trusting relationship, and you have a guiding type advisory relationship rather than a director. And I love that. Thanks. That's such a great story. Let's fast forward a little bit. So you worked up there, you worked your way through the ranks of a number of gaming companies over the years, got a number of promotions. And then you found yourself at EA Sports a few years later, right around the time Madden football was the largest selling game, I think, in the world for a couple of years. And you ended up running that studio. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like running a studio that ran this big game, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, as I reflect on that from a little bit of distance now, the memory that sort of comes to the foreground is entering that company as the new person. It was a very, very successful studio and operating at a scale. I mean, they were 650 people when I joined, which is a pretty big organization. They had 5 major product teams that were responsible for different games, things like Madden and NCAA football and the golf series, and there was a NASCAR product and so on. So a lot of different games being made. They all sort of had an annual life cycle. So they began and shipped in a 12-month window. So it was just a machine that was running. And I joined in the very late stages of them preparing to sort of final and release all of these products. Kind of the most hectic. It's like kitchen service. It's when everything is on fire. And so nobody had any time to onboard me, and I just sort of joined. And I'm looking around and I see thousands of fires burning around me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, A, like, what have I gotten myself into? And B, this is the Madden studio. These are the pros of the industry. They surely must see these things burning and have a plan to put all this stuff out. And so I found that to be a challenging sort of like, where do I jump in? How do I have an impact? Recognizing that I might be missing things, like maybe I'm underestimating what their abilities are. And so, I ended up finding kind of the biggest fire that I saw, and that's where I gave my attention. And we managed to sort of get everything out the door that season. And then it was tough. It really it was a bit of a meat grinder of a year. And so we stepped back and kind of reflected and surveyed the damage, if you will. Like what was the cost of doing that? And generated a catalog of really like systemic failings. And that became basically what I worked on for the next 6 years, was like, okay, how do you look past the symptoms of the problems and really identify what those root causes, like what was giving cause to these issues, and let's go put a solution in place for that so that we can just not have that thing happen to us again. And I used a particular approach that I developed there that I've since carried forward. And it was a way to, back to this idea of like being a manager that coaches. I didn't want to be the solution provider, because then they're always reliant on me to solve problems. I wanted to show the team how to self-assess and self-heal. So, the way that we did that is I showed them, how do you look past symptoms and find root causes, identify root causes. Then as a leader, I set some constraints for them. Here's how you think about, here's the boundaries in which you can work a solution for this thing. And then ask them to come up with the solutions. Give me proposals on how we fix these things. And what's really valuable about that sort of flipping the table and asking them to be the solution provider is that they're much closer to the work, and they have a much greater appreciation for the nuance of the challenges they're facing. And when they identify solutions, they have ownership. Their fingerprints are all over it. And so they already have built-in buy-in and will evangelize the solution to their peers. And so that became a really valuable sort of loop to start to create. And just by doing that, by being involved in the solution work, it's a teaching exercise. You teach them how to self-assess and how to self-diagnose and self-heal. So that became a really powerful experience there.
That was quite a journey you just took us on there. And, I love this idea of problem definition, not problem solution, right? That's, I think, the crux of the trusted advisor, helping people find their way versus telling them the way, if you will. Teach a man to fish, to use that analogy. And I love this concept of, did it feel like you were in the kitchen when you walked into EA? Like everything's on fire, there's everyone running in 50 different directions, and holy cow, like how do you even think about where to start in that circumstance?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it was just listening. And I remember sitting in one of the large teams that was underway then, and I will not name the project to protect the guilty. They were, from my observation from the outside and still uninitiated and really getting up to speed, it looked like they were way, way, way behind. And so we had a particular meeting. It was a technical design review, which was typically something that you would do fairly early in development. And it was a way to sort of check, like, do we have a way to implement the thing that we're trying to describe? The game that we envision, can we actually go build it? And so it was a meeting to come to terms with whether those two things are in alignment. And there was 30 people in the room, and I'm listening. I'm not a participant, I'm just there really more as a spectator. And I'm listening to all of them describe a whole series of problems, and it seemed like there was a lot of misalignment in the room. And so finally, towards the end of the conversation, I just stopped the room. They all, of course, knew who I was. I was in a position of authority. And I said, I'd like to understand from each of you your level of confidence, 1 to 100, that this thing's on time. And people went around the room, and the technical director that was responsible for all of the engineering on the project said 100% with confidence. And other people gave different numbers. And we got around to another technical director on the project, and he said 17%. So specific and the range, 17% to 100. And I'm like, okay, so there's a problem here. And that's the project where I first focused when I joined the studio. I felt like that was the thing that needed the most help.
I heard a lot about, listening, taking note, empowering people, engaging your team. And I think a word in there I might summarize a lot of what you talked about was giving them ownership, which I think you do when you help them come up with those solutions and bring them into the journey as opposed to telling them what to do, right? What a brilliant job. So we've got Alisa back. Thank you for coming back on, Alisa. How about we take some questions from the audience?
That sounds great. And we already have one from YouTube for Philip. And the question is, did you teach yourself to code? That's the question for Philip. And how did that help you to become a leader and to sell your ideas to venture capitalists? The money people. So did you teach yourself to code, and then how do you translate that, and how did that help you into this other piece, getting the money?
No, I never did. And, I suppose it's probably an area that I kind of wished at some point I'd gone to school for a technical background of some type or other. But, I think in as I sort of think about the broad sweep of my career, just based on the positions that I've been in, every single technical problem that I faced is actually boils down to a human problem. And the technology, once you sort out the human pieces of it, they tend to have fairly obvious steps to take. And I felt like the skill that I developed in my career and the place where I was unique, perhaps on the team, was I was adept at helping humans come together and sort of figure out how do we solve problems rather than, oh, I'm the person that has the insight around the technology here.
That's great. And then the second half of maybe just selling your ideas to venture capitalists or whoever it is that's holding the purse strings, whether that be inside the organization or outside, external.
Well, selling to VC is, probably everybody has a different experience, but for me, it was soul tapping. And it's just a grueling experience. Because you're going into these offices and they're fully aware that you're pitching everybody on Sand Hill Road, for example. And in fact, at the end of a meeting, oftentimes they'd be asked, like, who's your next appointment with? And you would name a competitive VC firm, and they're like, oh, they're across the street. Good luck with them. It's just that level of awareness is so bizarre. But we would so talk about iteration. One of the things that we would do is we would pitch. And based on the body language that we saw or the questions that we got or the feedback we got from the room, we'd run out to the parking lot and revise the pitch in the 5 minutes that we had before our next appointment. And then we'd go in with a slightly improved pitch. And we would do that. I mean, we'd spend a week in the Palo Alto area pitching these folks. We eventually found an investor that loved the story. And then from there, then you had a whole new set of problems. Like, how do you negotiate a term sheet with a professional VC?
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question of my own of you, Philip, and that is, I thought it was really interesting that from so much of what John has covered and what you also, from your position, you talk about managing people and kind of bringing out the best, co-opting them into the process and making it theirs and yours in the collaboration. The managing up part that you drew out when you talked about looking at your manager or your boss and those interactions with that person as an extended interview, how, I'm just curious from an employee standpoint, what the takeaway here might be. How do you prepare? I mean, what is the boots on the ground type advice that you would give to folks that are trying to be mindful of what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what my approach is with my current boss, who holds a position of incredible responsibility and breadth inside of Microsoft, which is two things. One is to be incredibly transparent with him around the problems that I'm facing and my solutions, because what I don't expect him to solve my problems. What I want to expose is my approach to solving them. And so that I build confidence in him that whatever problem I'm faced with, that he can trust that I'm going to find a solution for it. And if he doesn't like a solution that I'm pursuing, that he has an opportunity to intervene. And the second part of that kind of transparency is I never want him to be surprised by something that I bring to him. And so there's an expectation in our industry, just given how difficult it is to build software that also has to, sort of capture the entertainment fickleness of a consumer market, is that the expectation is that we will, it's not a question of if we'll have problems, but it's how many and what are you going to do to solve them. And so there's actually a freedom from judgment when we run into problems in our work, at least inside of Microsoft. And instead there's support and what can I do to help? And what are you doing to solve this problem? But the last thing that my boss wants and the last thing I want is for people to hide problems, and then I get surprised when they're self-evident, and because then you just lose optionality around how you're going to address them.
Interesting. I think we have another question here. Can you share your thoughts, John, on how graduate school helped further shape your career and led to the book? This is a good one. The MBA. How did that shape your career and also lead to the book?
Boy, I feel like I could spend an hour talking about that one. That's a fun one. You know, when I think about school, I always wanted to go back to graduate school. It was sort of a dream of mine. And I actually started in Florida, and interestingly started the application process at the same time a new job popped up. And so I was applying for them at the same time. Actually started school in Florida and dropped out. So I'm technically an MBA dropout as well as an MBA graduate. And then when I came up here, immediately realized I'm going to go to Georgetown. And when I think about the 2 years I spent there, one, you get to know this group of people, incredible group of people, very, very well, because you're just forced into this very high stress environment, kind of like Philip's story walking into EA, I think. And you're just tasked with all these challenges. But over those 2 years, you learn an incredible amount about yourself, about what you're capable of, how to stretch yourself in many ways, because you're pushed really hard during those 2 years, because you have all these other responsibilities going on, right? And I think more importantly, what they taught us was, and they really tried to reinforce, and this back to your comment about the Jesuit values, is, you know, when we left there, they said, how do you help others? You know, when you leave here, the way you carry the Georgetown mission forward is to go out and create an opportunity for somebody. And I've really tried to take that mindset in everything that I do. And I've started mentoring and done a bunch of work around that. And it's just been incredibly valuable to just expand my network, help other people out. It's really just been extraordinary. And specifically to the book, I mean, I don't think I would have this book if I didn't go to this school. I mean, I sat down with Prashant Malavia December 15th of 2019, and he's a Georgetown professor, and he said, he introduced me to the book coach. So I don't think any of that would have happened, quite frankly, without that experience.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
How will you know when the optimizer mindset has taken hold? This question clearly for John. How will you know when the optimizer mindset has taken hold?
You know, there's a few ways to identify, but I think the key one is, and I certainly saw this in my role a number of times, when people that you didn't typically see coming to the table with new and fresh ideas suddenly just appear in an unsolicited fashion. You know, someone who, certainly was good at their job, but wasn't always on the cutting edge of how do we get this better. Suddenly they're turning up and saying, hey, have you thought about trying this? Or why don't we think about this a different way? And when you start to see that happen, that's one great sign. Another one is you start to see these conversations happen outside of you. So you find out from one of your employees or team members, hey, they came up with a new idea, and you say, well, where did you come up with that? Oh, I was talking to my peer about that, and we developed it. So one, they come to you, and two, you start to see it happen organically without you really having to push it. And that's what's so interesting about this thing, because this optimizer mindset, because it oftentimes has to start out as a bit of a push or a nudge, if you will. But I think if you can really get it going, it becomes a pull. Everyone starts to pull each other along. And that's really fun to see. And those are two examples of it where you start to see kind of them pulling each other along, which is really fun to see.
Sounds good. The next question is for either John or Philip. Maybe we should hear from Philip. I'm just seeing the tail end of it. My team sometimes struggles here. Is this somebody I work with? How do you approach goal deadline setting? How do you, Philip, approach goal and deadline setting if/when your team is the one setting the target versus when it is set by others? My team sometimes struggles with this one.
Two thoughts come to mind here. And one is, first of all, I believe that constraints are an essential part of allowing teams to unlock real breakthrough. And it's the blank page problem. When you give somebody a piece of paper and you say, write something or draw something, well, and you have a limitless number of possibilities, it can be hard to get started. And so when you put a box around it and you say, this is the space that you have to, be creative, and oftentimes the constraints themselves really empower people to make some choices. And so whether that's an externally imposed set of constraints or self imposed set of constraints, I think matters less. one way that I think about them is that, to me, there's a difference between a target and a commitment. And when you start out to do something, there's so much that you don't know. In fact, there's more that you don't know than you do. And so it's difficult to say, I can give you a commitment if your goal is quality. Like, if my goal is to deliver on a particular date, well then, okay, I'll make the date. And the variable is going to be whatever it is that I deliver. But if the most important thing is I deliver something of quality, then the date has to be a function of the thing. And so, but the constraint is important. So I use early deadlines as targets. And then there's a point where our understanding of the thing that we're making is greater than the sort of areas of unknowns. And that's when we switch from targets to commitments. And then a commitment is something that the team has a lot of more knowledge about, and ownership and setting. And then our job is just to hold them accountable and to inspect their work and look for places where they need obstacles removed and clear the path, allow them to be successful, help them be successful.
I love that. I heard transparency there in a big way, and creating accountability. Well, amazingly, our hour is burned by very quickly. It really went fast. And so I want to do a little bit of a wrap up here, but first say, Alisa, thank you so much for hosting the program tonight. It's so great to see you. And Philip, thank you for being here. It's great to see you, my friend. And can't thank you enough for all the lessons and knowledge you shared with me throughout this journey and throughout the book. It's just been incredible. So for those of you listening in, I hope you got a sense of, what's inside of the book. If you haven't read it yet, Philip is the lead story in chapter 5, and we just gave you a little bit of a sneak peek and a bit more depth behind many of those stories. So thank you to you both. And I also want to make sure that I thank everyone on this call here. Right, this has been just an unbelievable journey, and as we talked about early on, I wouldn't be here without all of you. And certainly, I would not have bet money on last December when I started this whole thing that I would have a #1, best-selling new release on Amazon in December of 2020. I mean, that I would never have bet money on that. And some of you ask, "Gosh, what are you going to do next now that the book is done?" And it's been, I think the next chapter is just beginning. And in fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've had a number of outreaches from people asking me to come in and do speaking engagements. And in fact, the little note I put out earlier today that I wanted to announce tonight was this very morning, I just locked in my very first official speaking engagement. I'm really excited about it. It's a innovation conference group based in the Netherlands, believe it or not. I mean, it's just unbelievable how, thank you to the world today of social media, that I asked the guy how he found me, and he said he found me because of LinkedIn. And, I posted some content, and he read about it and saw a friend like it or something like this. It's unbelievable. So there's obviously real value out there. So as I said, the journey's still very much in the early stages. I really appreciate some of the referrals many of you have given to me, and hopefully they continue. Tomorrow, I'm talking to a guy in Mexico City. Friday, I have a call with a gentleman in Bangalore, India, to do similar types of talks. I mean, it's just unbelievable how this thing is taking off. So just a quick recap of the journey. And I want to just really thank everybody involved, because there were so many. In addition to the 249 copies that were ordered, late last summer, fall, Kamal Bhatia, a friend of mine, I sat down with him, and back to my thing about asking for advice. I asked, how would you go about, I was in a career switch. How would you go about thinking about, what I'm doing right now? And he said, why don't you write a paper and put it out on LinkedIn or something? And I thought, great idea. Write the paper, share it with a good friend, Mike Gottesman. He said, why don't you make it into a series and put it out over 4 weeks or something? I thought, that's a good idea. Shared that series with a friend, Nick Yeager, who at the time was working with people on helping executives get a series of papers published. And he spent weeks with me refining it. And then fast forward to December 15th, and I shared that series with Prashant Malavia at the school when you could still go out for lunch, I guess. And he said, I think you've got the makings of a book here. And he introduced me to Eric Custer. Eric program, it's a cohort program, so you're not in it alone. Even though many nights I spent writing alone, throughout the week, you have tons of contact with others through Zoom and in a virtual capacity. And then at the end of your manuscript, Eric introduces you to New Degree Press. And Brian Bees is the head of publishing there. Just two extraordinary individuals. You don't have to publish with New Degree Press, but they make it really easy. And they continue the coaching on the publishing side that Eric had. So it's just been an unbelievable journey. And that's really how it came to be. But to the 249 of you, I mean, so much feedback throughout this last year as beta readers from how, as I talked about the title earlier and changing that, from which headshots to pick, the cover design, boy, that probably got the most action out of everybody was the cover design. And I certainly have to thank Eric Horner for helping me get the final touches on that. Really extraordinary time he spent with me on doing that after everyone else's feedback came in. He was great, super helpful. And, with editing, a number of folks stepped up with editing, which I really appreciated. It's no easy task. In addition to the professional editing team I had, I was soliciting feedback from the beta readers to say, hey, is this stuff making sense to outside people? My brother, Greg Saunders, did a bunch of work on that. Mike Doniger, Stasha Levin, Stella Sitt, Micah Kai, Ed Berzada, Patty Brennan, Tim Varan, Jason Grom, Pat Wisniewski, and Allison Southwick. Every one of those people put time into editing the book, and I really appreciate that. I do owe a special thanks to my sister, Kim Grant, and Jesse Niemanen. Jesse is someone I found in Finland. He co-founded an innovation consultancy. I found research in the book. Those two edited every single chapter in the book. So many people kind of edited one or two or three of them, if you will, or a few here and there. They literally, it was like a race between the two of them. Just once I put the content out to get it back to me fastest, and they did that. And boy, was it helpful in getting, just keeping the process rolling along. So Kim and Jesse, thank you so much. Thank you, my family. My mother and father, Robert and Elizabeth Saunders. I grew up in a house where they were constantly reading, constantly learning. It really inspired us to never stop doing that. And I can't thank them enough for doing that. And it certainly helped me to get to where I am today. And to my own family right here in this house, my wife, Dina, sons, John and Joe. When you're writing, it can be a pretty painful process and frustrating at times for sure. And, it was nothing helped more than walking out of this office and talking to one of them and, breaking through some block I was having, writer's block, and, cracking a laugh. And that really helped push things along. So just a big thanks to my family for helping me along here. So thank you again to all of you for all of your encouragement and support. So many others that I've talked to throughout the last year that have helped get me through a slump and help me find a new way to go about it. So I really appreciate that. But we made a book together and it's been amazing. And I really look forward to sharing the rest of this journey with you. As I said, we're just getting started. So with that, let me say thank you all for joining us tonight and good night.